Bloodsuckings. I'm back with another vampire special list, this time from 2010 to 2019. Several of these films have been mentioned in the comments of the other videos from this decade's vampire film series. The reason they hadn't been mentioned in those lists is because this wasn't this particular decade. Anyway, in no particular order, first one up on here is Let Me In from 2010. I saw this in the theater when it came out, and when I saw it at the time, I was not familiar with the original Swedish film or novel. I have since read the book and seen the Swedish film. And comparatively, this is a little bit anemic because it is nowhere near as dark in some ways, but I do think it stands alone pretty well. It is still a solid film. It's definitely the Americanized version of it, and so there are a lot of things about it that are definitely different, but overall it does follow the same story, and some of the main plot points were changed a little bit to accommodate the fact that this takes place in America instead of Sweden in the 1980s. It is still worth watching. Next one up on here is Styria, or Angels of Darkness from 2014. I wanted to investigate this one predominantly because it is based off of Carmilla, which is one of my favorite vampire novellas. And it has Stephen Rea in it, and it's a little bit too art house for its own good, but it does have some strong Carmilla elements that do make it worth looking into if you're into that story. I believe it's filmed in Hungary, Romania, I'm not entirely sure, but the countryside and the setting is quite atmospheric and does work pretty well. Vampires from 2010 is from Belgium. I stumbled across this one ages ago and half forgot about it until another film on this list was released, and I was like, wait, I think I've seen that before. But this is a mockumentary about a family of vampires in Belgium, and they let a human TV crew into their house. It's actually pretty entertaining. It got kind of dark. It was not especially funny, but it was quite dark in its own way, but it did have a lot of black humor in it. I believe it's on Amazon Prime, but again, I think when I watched it was on like Showtime or something at my mom's house like almost 10 years ago, so I don't remember it super well, but I did think it was worth looking into. One that I am always trying to get people to see is Stakeland from 2010. I have not seen the sequel because I hear it is nowhere near as good. But overall, this is a vampire apocalypse, so it has a lot of similar setup to how they do zombie apocalypse films. But in this case, there's vampires, which also features some weird cults, and it's very strange, but it is totally worth watching. Upon the time of its release, I'd never really seen anything like it before, so it's well worth looking into. Next one, which I don't have a copy of, from 2016, is Transfiguration. This one's interesting because it's very much a coming-of-age type of story. It's a little bit like a more contemporary version of George Romero's Martin from the 1970s. I didn't think it was perfect, but this kid is hyper obsessed with vampires and does believe himself to be one, and goes to all these lengths so that he can either fully transition and turn into the vampire he so believes himself to be, or not. It's a little bit muddied in, you can't tell if there is a supernatural element to it or if it's mostly just a drama, but as far as I remember, it's on Shudder, and it was well worth looking into at the very least. We Are the Night from 2010 is a German film. This one is a little bit too campy for its own good. Of all things, it was my introduction to the band IMX, but this is a kind of sorority of vampires, and that they will only turn women into vampires, which I thought was a rather entertaining concept. And then this group of vampires does in fact run a nightclub in Berlin, and they recruit a new girl. It's kind of a mess, but it is very fun. It's very entertaining, which is really what you want in a film. It doesn't always have to be high quality, so it is worth looking into even if it isn't one of the best ones. Byzantium from 2012 with Saoirse Ronan and Jamie Arterton. This is from the same director as Interview with the Vampire, so that might intrigue some people who haven't seen it before, but overall I do think it's a very lush and very beautiful kind of a horror drama story. I think that it's well told. I do think it's one of my preferred Neil Jordan films, and it's very Irish, because it does in fact take place in his home country, but I do think it's well worth watching. There's a lot of very stunning cinematography. However, if you are squeamish, there is a lot of blood in this one. Which, I mean, this is a list of vampires. If you hate blood, you probably shouldn't watch vampire movies. Also from 2012, and of a much lower caliber, is Dark Shadows. And yes, I have a DVD copy of this. I also saw it at the midnight premiere when it came out. It's so stupid. It is so stupid. It is a mess. Do I find it entertaining every single time I watch it? Absolutely. It is kind of a disaster. And judge it all you want, but the original TV show was a soap opera and wasn't all that good. And there was a lot of material to try and adapt from. In fact, there was so much material to adapt from, being the longest running soap opera, that you can't really get a good film adaptation of it. And since I haven't seen Dan Curtis's TV films of the original show from the 70s, and I did watch a lot of Tim Burton during my formative years, this one is still very entertaining for me, even if it is incredibly stupid. Less stupid and definitely worth looking into is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from 2014. This one's very art house in the sense that there's a lot of kind of bleak empty night, and they're speaking in Farsi because it takes place in a fictional Iranian town, even though it's filmed in California, and it's in black and white, and the main vampire girl is interested in like pop music. It's a very strange film, but it is rather stunning in its own way, and I would love to revisit it. I haven't seen it since it was released when I was in college, but I really wish that Anna Lily Amirpour had a better sophomore effort, because The Bad Batch was terrible, but this was a very strong freshman effort, and I do greatly appreciate it and highly recommend it to people. Only Lovers Left Alive, which I have a big poster of that my friend found for me in college, was my introduction for the most part to Jim Jarmusch, and I love this film not because anything happens, because nothing happens, but because it has a very strong emotion attached to it. There is this sense of atmosphere and beauty and everything to it that is rather stunning. It's very ambient. It's very much ambiance geared. I do think that Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston work well together. I thought that it was very subtle and beautiful kind of drama more than it is a horror film, but definitely aesthetic vampire perfection in this one. Highly worth looking into if you love movies for the aesthetic. And then the film that I absolutely die for, which is What We Do in the Shadows. This is one of my favorite movies. It is just entirely too funny. This was, I think, my introduction to Taika Waititi, who has since become one of my favorite directors because everything he does is really good. And he plays Viago, but this is a documentary crew goes to interview a flatmate filled with vampires. So you can see why I was a little bit confused when this came out. I ended up hunting for it forever because I wanted to watch it before it was actually available in the US. And it was so good, and I pre-ordered the DVD months in advance because I didn't have a region-free player in college. And it's just so good and so funny. The TV show is also very, very funny, and I didn't bring over the first season DVD that I have, and I am very excited for second season, which might take me forever because I don't have FX, but this is a very fun film. It is so funny and so stupid and so beautiful, and I'm endlessly entertained by it and quote it very frequently. This was a film that I consider to be a bit of a surprise because when it was first released, I was convinced it was going to be just stupid. So Dracula Untold from 2014 is the origin story of Dracula. It blends a little bit of Bram Stoker's fictional character with the historical Vlad Tepes. And even though it is not especially accurate, it takes just enough history to make it intriguing. It is still very fun, even if it is not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination. That, and I'm rather fond of Luke Evans, so I have some personal bias. It's just a very entertaining film and nowhere near as lame as I expected it to be upon its release. I was pleasantly surprised. Bite Marks from 2011, I haven't had the chance to see, so I don't know anything about that one. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter from 2012, I saw in the theater upon its release, and I hated it. I thought it was so stupid. I was embarrassed and wanted to leave the theater. I went to the midnight premiere of this because my friend and I wanted to go to a midnight premiere, and it was just bad slow motion fight choreography and just didn't make any sense and was a total waste of my time. I'm sure there are people that disagree with me, but I don't care for it at all. I think it's so stupid. Speaking of stupid, for as stupid as Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is, I can't stop loving the Underworld movies, even though they are terrible. And these two sequels are especially bad. There's like a mega werewolf. This is when vampires have been eradicated and Celine has been on ice for several years and secretly had a child, which was a total jump the shark piece of bullshit. I find it very entertaining nonetheless. Same with Blood Wars, which again makes little to no sense. And I don't even care because I just have had a bit of a crush on Celine since I was 13, and I just get such a kick out of these movies, it doesn't even matter that they are absolute trash. So, you know. The thing is, when you watch a lot of vampire movies, your standards go really, really low. Anyway, Midnight Sun from 2011, I haven't seen. The Unwanted from 2014 is another Carmilla adaptation. This time it's a contemporary retelling in the American South. And I thought it was good and really bad at the same time. I don't know. If you like Carmilla, you can look into it. I don't think it's the worst adaptation there is, but it's not an especially great adaptation. Kiss the Damned from 2012 was kind of a 70s throwback erotic thriller. I didn't love it. I wanted to like it better. It has a lot of very stunning visuals, but very little good storytelling. And I don't remember more or less any of the plot because I haven't seen it since it was released. I don't know. I think it tried too hard to be the new version of Daughters of Darkness and didn't quite succeed. Next one out of this 3-pack here is Priest. This movie was so boring. I thought it was a crime for an action movie to be this boring. I haven't read the original graphic novel or comic that it's based off of, but this was one of those films I thought would be incredibly fun, and then just manages to be an entire slog to get through, so I don't recommend that one at all. Since again, I love stupid movies, Vampire Academy from 2014 is one of those that is really bad. The main reason I like it enough to have a copy of it and have seen it more than once is because I used to read these books when I was in like middle school, early high school. I think I got up to the 4th one before I gave up. I thought the first one was so entertaining and then they just kept getting worse. But because I was so entertained by the books, I decided to give the film a chance. And even though it isn't that far from the books, seeing this as an adult instead of a teenager made me realize how stupid those books are. Oh well, I still get a kick out of the film, and I have seen worse. And as far as stupid teen vampire comedy horrors go, this is far from the worst. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but I do find it very entertaining. Next one, Vamps from 2012. I mean, this is a couple of female vampires that are glitzing it up in New York. Kind of, it's just a comedy. It's not really a horror movie at all. They're just like uptown girls that just happen to be vampires. I haven't seen this since it came out, and I don't remember it terribly well. I remember it being stupid funny. So if you're into that kind of thing, feel free to investigate it. Bloodsucking Bastards from 2015 was not especially memorable. I thought the concept was rather entertaining, which is basically that the upper crust, like owners of this business, the upper management of an office building are vampires preying on the pawns in the building. I don't really remember exactly what happened. It was one of those like black humor kind of things. It was a mess. The Moth Diaries from 2011 is based off of a book that based things primarily sort of kind of off of Carmilla. I haven't read the Moth Diaries novel. I just appreciate the atmosphere and the sense of like time slip in this film. It is far from perfect. It's not what I'd call a great film, but I I like the mood of it a lot, and I do appreciate it is inspired by Carmilla, which I cannot apparently bring up enough. So this one's worth looking into, but don't expect too much from it. Fright Night from 2011 is one of those movies that I saw it in the theater and I thought it was stupid. And then I revisited it several years later and decided it really isn't that bad, and I actually enjoy it quite a bit as far as a retelling of the 1985 film. So while I do like the 1985 original better, I do think this is a solid send-up. Because you can't really make a direct remake of it, trying to modernize the story to adapt to the 21st century instead of the mid-80s, I thought that the Vegas setup worked out a little bit better instead of a late-night TV host, which we don't really have nowadays, or even 10 years ago. But you do still have hack magician acts on the Vegas Strip. Plus you have David Tennant in leather pants, which is still just a hilariously strange thing. So this one is still quite entertaining. It does make enough little throwback nods to the original, including having a cameo from the original Jerry, Chris Sarandon, that I do find it worth looking into, or giving a second shot if you didn't like it the first time around. Next one on here, Dario Argento's Dracula 3D from 2012 is one of those films that felt like an assault on my eyes. The safe bet is, as someone who likes Argento's films, don't watch anything past Two Evil Eyes from 1990 because you are just bound to suffer. And I've seen all of his films, and there was a lot of suffering involved, none more so than this one, which was so abysmally bad that I wish that he would send me an apology letter. And as someone that watches a lot of bad films, you know that's pretty awful. Freaks of Nature from 2015 has not just vampires, but zombies and humans and aliens, and it's a mess. This is a very fun ride, but it is an incredibly stupid movie. Basically, they have a town where humans and vampires and zombies all happen to cohabitate, and then everything gets really shaken up when there's an alien invasion. So there's that. Yeah, that's a weird movie that actually happened. It's quite entertaining and very stupid, so if you like that kind of thing. Last one on here, which I can't say that I necessarily recommend, is My Sucky Teen Romance from 2011. What I do appreciate about this film, despite the fact that it has a absolutely microscopic budget and a very amateurish film style, is the amateurish film style has to do with the fact that the director was a 16-year-old girl that just did this with her family. It is really a home style type of thing. She's a very, very young director, and she went for this whole idea of just teenage nerds that are in like vampire obsessed love. So I mean, it's stupid, but it also does kind of appeal in this weird sense of nostalgia of what it was like to be a teenager, because it is written by and directed by a teenager. So I do appreciate that aspect of it, even if the film itself is not objectively great. It is well worth looking into, so you can at least kind of appreciate that she did. Anyway, till next time, Darklings.